The old engine choked out another cough, a stuttering rhythm that had become the soundtrack to my life. I gripped the corroded control stick, knuckles white against the rust-flaked metal. Stars, pinpricks of indifferent light, streamed past the cracked viewport as if the entire universe couldn't be bothered to acknowledge the rickety old scow that scraped its way across the void. This was the wasted belt, not some sanitized space lane. No blinking nav buoys or comforting patrol ships. Out here, it was just you, the scavenged tech you strapped together with hope and solder, and the unblinking darkness. The asteroid chunk I'd locked my scanners onto tumbled end over end, a decent-sized nickel-iron lump. It would fetch a tidy sum with old Gregor back at the scrap ring, if I could get there in one piece. "Don't like the looks of that," muttered Skitch, my gunner. He squinted through the viewport, eyes narrowed beneath a mop of grease-slicked hair. "That ain't natural rotation, boss." He was right. The asteroid was spinning too fast, too erratic. Not a rogue bit of debris, but something tampered with. I should have turned tail and burned away, found another, less ominous-looking rock. I had bills to pay, mouths to feed, not the mouths of wives and kiddies. Nothing so wholesome belonged out here. Just the crew. Mutants, dregs, and me, the lucky schmuck who'd cobbled them all together into a semi-functional operation. We were getting damn low on fuel, though. And Gregor's prices, let's just say they rivaled the cruelty of whatever waited on that spinning rock. "All right, gear up," I growled. "Skitch, you're in the turret. Jeb, suit up and prep the tethers. Let's see what treasure some poor bastard left hidden out here." A rusty groan filled the ship as the airlock hissed open. Jeb, a hulking beast of a man with cybermods sprouting from his forearms, shuffled in. Even the air tasted of his sweat, of oil and fear. He'd been one of Volkov's experiments before I liberated him. I wasn't the kind of man who asked questions about the past, not when the present was so damned precarious. As Jeb clamped his helmet and mag boots on, a wave of distortion washed over the comm. "Picking up some kind of noise? Scrambler tech, I think." Skitch's voice crackled. Damn. No one used scramblers out here except the warlords, the kind of warped tyrants who'd carved out little empires among the wreckage of civilization. "Stay sharp," I warned. Survival in the belt didn't just mean outwitting the vacuum. It meant outwitting the predators in it. I piloted us closer, matching the asteroid's spin. The closer we got, the weirder it looked. Not just the unnatural tumble, but pockmarks and protrusions that hinted at engines, missile ports, some kind of fortified salvage. "Dock in 3, I said. The ship shuddered as our grapple claws bit into the asteroid's metallic flesh. "Skitch, whatever's in there, make sure it stays in there. Jeb, you're on me." The airlock ground open, spilling us onto a cold metal floor bathed in dim red emergency lights. "Lab," Jeb rumbled, his voice a whisper due to the cybernetic vocal mod. He was right. This wasn't a warlord's weapons depot. It was something far more twisted. A trail of chemical stink led deeper into the asteroid's metallic bowels. Each twist of the corridor revealed another grisly detail. Surgical tables, hastily scrawled notes, and discarded instruments splattered with an unsettling, viscous fluid. This wasn't just a lab, it was a butcher's shop. "Someone was playing God here," Skitch hissed through the comms. His voice was tight, a tremor lurking beneath his usual bluster. Jeb stopped dead, his colossal figure a silhouette against the dim lighting. He pointed with a cybernetic limb, a jury-rigged mining drill that twitched in silent agitation. A smear of blood marked the wall, next to a crude bulkhead that appeared recently welded into place. "Someone's still here," I said, my hand drifting to the blaster holstered at my hip. I exchanged a tense glance with Jeb. "You want the honors?" Jeb's voice crackled with a morbid eagerness. Volkov, the warlord who'd made him into this half-man, half-machine monstrosity, had kindled a darkness in him, a desire for the kind of violence I tried to keep at bay. But out in the belt, sometimes the choice wasn't yours. I nodded, my stomach churning. Kick it in. Skitch, cover us. Jeb slammed a magnetized boot into the bulkhead, leaving a sizable dent. Another kick and the door shrieked open. The sight on the other side stole any breath left in my lungs. It was a chamber of horrors. Cages lined the walls, some empty, others not. Mutations. That was the only word for them. Humanoid shapes hunched and twitched, warped by splicing and crude augmentations. Eyes too numerous, limbs withered or spliced with insectile appendages, skin stretched taut over misshapen skulls. And the smell. God, that coppery sweet scent made me want to vomit. A figure in a stained lab coat turned from a console in the room's center, balding, with rheumy eyes that snapped wide in alarm. "Who in blazes are you?" His voice was thin, reedy, at odds with the carnage around him. "Name's Tark," I said, stepping into the horrific chamber. The monsters in the cages moaned and hissed, their altered bodies scrabbling pathetically at the bars. Bile rose in my throat. "We ain't looking for trouble with nobody, just passing through." "Trouble?" The scientist tittered, a laugh bubbling up in his throat. "Don't be ridiculous. You've stumbled onto progress. Salvation." I glanced at Jeb and his single visible eye widened in shared disgust. The good part of me, a dwindling ember these days, wanted to blast this twisted bastard, put an end to whatever abomination he'd unleashed here. But pragmatism, that icy voice of survival, cut through the outrage. "We're going to take what we can salvage and go," I said, forcing steel into my voice. "You going to make this difficult?" The scientist spread his hands, a twisted parody of innocence. "Difficult? I just want to share my work. The belt, this harsh and unforgiving place. It'll kill us all unless we adapt. My creations..." He gestured at the caged horrors. "They're the future. We'll take our chances." Turning, I motioned for Jeb to prepare for a hasty retreat, but Skitch's panicked cry stopped us cold. "No, boss, behind you!" The scientist was gone. A creature leapt from a darkened corner, chitinous, swift, and sprouting a blade-tipped limb where an arm should have been. Time warped. I reacted on instinct, not thought. Blaster fire erupted, the cramped chamber erupting in blinding flashes and the acrid scent of ozone. The creature jerked, its chitinous armor smoking where the blasts hit, but it wasn't enough. It bounded forward, a screech splitting the air. Jeb lunged, shielding me with his massive frame. His drill arm whined into motion, a buzzsaw spinning into a storm of lethal teeth. The creature twisted too fast, and metal met carapace in a shriek of protest. Jeb's cry bounced off the walls, a sound of rage and pain as the creature raked at his cybernetic arm, gouging at the delicate wiring. "Boss!" Skitch's voice was a frantic bark. "More of them coming!" I risked a glance over Jeb's shoulder. The cages were rattling as the mutated abominations threw themselves against the bars. And behind them, shadows lurked in the gloom. More of those insectile horrors, their compound eyes gleaming with a desire to feed. "Fall back!" I yelled, holstering my blaster and shoving aside a console to reach the door. This wasn't a scavenging op, it was a damn suicide mission. The scientist, the lunatic behind this nightmare, was nowhere to be seen. Probably had himself some escape hatch. Left us to face his twisted handiwork. Jeb staggered back, swatting at the creature still clinging to his arm. It chittered, spitting a foul, viscous fluid that sizzled against his skin. "Get off me, you cockroach!" he bellowed, swinging his drill arm with wild abandon. Finally, the creature disengaged, leaping back with surprising agility. The moment was seized, not planned. We bolted for the door, Skitch covering our retreat with crackling blasts from his turret. The screeches from within the chamber grew louder as we hammered the warped metal shut behind us. "Airlock!" I shouted, shoving past Jeb. I could practically taste the coppery fear in the air as we staggered down the corridor. Skitch was a blubbering wreck by the time we clambered into the ship, the airlock cycling shut behind him. Scrap and spit, that was close. Too close. "We gotta go," I barked, scrambling into the pilot's seat and punching the ignition. My hands shook on the controls as the scavenged engines roared to life. Jeb slumped into a nearby chair, cradling his injured arm. It was a mess, hydraulics leaking and half-shredded wires spewing sparks. He swore, a string of curses that spoke volumes about his pain. "We survived," I muttered. We'd dodged another bullet out here in the void, but by the slimmest of margins. And survival, I was quickly learning, came with an increasingly steep price tag in the wasted belt. We'd stumbled on something rotten at the heart of this asteroid, a darkness that could consume us all. Our ship lurched with an angry groan as we broke free of the asteroid's grasp. No warning shots, no pursuit. I stared out at the vast expanse dotted with starlight, a cold dread pooling in my gut. It was more than just salvaging a few parts now. That twisted scientist and his creations were a threat. To the scrap ring, to every miserable outpost clinging to survival in this landscape. "Boss!" Jeb coughed, and the sound was wet, worrisome. I glanced at him to see his complexion taking on a sickly pallor. Sweat beaded his brow, dripping down into those scars Volkov's experiments had left. "That thing spit on me," he said, his voice a strained whisper. "Feels like my insides are on fire." Skitch swore. "You seeing a medic, big guy, soon as we dock?" Jeb slumped further, shivering even though the ship's heater struggled to keep pace with the chill from the void. Something wasn't right. "Skitch, radio Gregor," I ordered. We needed answers. "Tell him it's urgent, and to have old Mauler ready." Mauler was the ring's resident sawbones. Well, Bones was optimistic. He mostly dealt with cybernetics, patching up battered crew after run-ins with scavengers or pirates. But he'd seen his share of belt plagues too, things that turned a man inside out faster than you could blink. Gregor's scratchy reply crackled over the comms a few minutes later. "Tark, heard you had complications. Be docked in an hour. Mauler says meet him at the infirmary, not my usual bar. This some kind of quarantine situation?" I glanced at Jeb, his breathing strained and difficult. Whatever those lab monstrosities did, it wasn't something easily fixed. "Could be," I replied, my voice tight. He made a non-committal grunt, signing off. I stared back out at the void, the distant glint of the scrap ring a beacon I wasn't sure I wanted to reach. An hour felt like a lifetime. Jeb drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering and thrashing against his restraints. Skitch was a silent lump beside me, his usual bravado extinguished. He kept glancing at Jeb, as if he expected the big man to sprout an extra limb or some other horror at any given moment. Finally, the scrap ring loomed large in the viewport, a tangled mess of salvaged vessels, old space stations, and repurposed asteroids. A monument to human tenacity, or maybe sheer desperation. Docking was rough, always was. The jolt sent a tremor through the ship, and Jeb jolted awake with a strangled yelp. "Get him to Mauler," I snapped to Skitch. "Fast!" They stumbled out of the ship, my eyes following the way Jeb's massive frame leaned heavily on Skitch, his breaths wheezy and uneven. I needed a drink, a strong one. And then, I needed to figure out how the hell to warn the belt about the abomination we'd seen. Because pretending we could just forget, just run from it, was a fool's hope. Something like that wouldn't just stay hidden out in the dark reaches of space. Gregor's hole-in-the-wall bar was less inviting than usual. Gone were the raucous laughter, the smell of cheap synth booze, and the usual crowd of grizzled belters drowning their sorrows. An uneasy silence hung in the air as I pushed my way past the wary faces watching from the shadows. "Tark," Gregor grunted, rising from a shadowed booth. A bulky man with a perpetual scowl, he looked less a businessman and more like an ex-bouncer turned warlord in waiting. Maybe these days there wasn't much difference. Bad news travels fast, eh? I sank onto the bench opposite him. "Whatever was in that asteroid, it ain't good." His shrewd eyes narrowed. "Mauler checked your boy. What's he saying?" "Nothing definitive," I admitted. "Some kind of toxin or maybe a virus, mutating fast." Gregor swore, a stream of curses that illustrated his vast knowledge of the belt's less respectable vernacular. Then he leaned forward, forearms braced on the sticky table. "You stumbled on one of the labs, Volkov's or maybe that butcher, Karnak. The two most notorious warlords in the belt, infamous for their horrific experiments. But those creations back on the asteroid, that was something different. A sickness that warped bone and mind. Was it the work of a madman or something altogether more calculated? Wasn't Volkov's style, I muttered, the memory of that twisted lab still making my stomach churn. This was methodical, deliberate. Mauler emerged from the back room then, his usual sour expression replaced by something grimmer. A bulky cybernetic arm whirred quietly, and his single good eye was narrowed in concentration. "It's spreading," he announced bluntly. "Not just physical, neither. This infection, it's messing with Jeb's neural interface. Could hijack his whole system." "Can you fix him?" I asked. Mauler shook his head. "Cut out the infected parts, maybe. But even if he survives, and that's a big if, he ain't going to be the same." A wave of guilt flooded me. I'd led Jeb and the crew into this. "Do it," I said, my voice hoarse. "Whatever you have to." Gregor grunted. "Generous of you, but what about that thing you brought back? If it's changing Jeb that fast, what's it going to do to the ring?" I leaned back, the synth leather of the booth creaking beneath me. "I ain't got a damn answer for that, Gregor, but I know we can't just ignore it." He snorted, a harsh, cynical sound. "Noble, Tark. Real noble. Let's warn every pirate, raider and scavenger about the things lurking in the dark. See how far that gets us." "We'll be dead either way," I countered. "Slow death or fast, that's the choice the belt has right now." Gregor leaned back, considering. He wasn't built for sentiment, but he wasn't a fool either. He saw the threat, understood the simple calculus of survival. "Might need firepower," he finally grumbled. "You got a plan?" I'd been thinking ever since we'd left that wretched asteroid. It was a madman's scheme, born of brutal pragmatism. "I know someone who might help," I said slowly. And the thought of going to him, hat in hand, made my gut twist with hatred. But right now, old grudges would have to wait. Out here, it wasn't about liking your allies, just needing them to keep breathing another day. The Black Star. Just the name made my blood run cold. Not a vessel, but a haven for scum, the lowest of the low, and presiding over it all was Wraith, an ex-merc turned belt kingpin with more blood on his hands than most warlords could dream of. He was everything I despised in this broken world, and likely our only damn hope. It took every bit of self-control not to flinch as Wraith's bodyguard frisked me with an unnerving thoroughness. Their heavy gaze slid over my blaster, then the cybernetic augments on my arm, remnants from my own mercenary days that set me apart from the usual rabble Wraith welcomed onto his ship-turned stronghold. "Tark," Wraith's voice purred from the shadows of his opulent command center. His reclining chair turned to reveal him, an unnerving hybrid of machine and man, cybernetics gleaming from beneath his tailored suit. "Never thought I'd see you begging at my doorstep. What's so important it brings a rival this far into my territory?" "We've got a problem," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the rage simmering just beneath the surface. "Bigger than both of us." Wraith leaned forward, cybernetic eye glinting with cold curiosity. "That so? Care to elaborate, or do you enjoy riddles when your life's on the line?" I explained it all. The asteroid lab, the twisted experiments, Jeb's condition, and the urgent threat it all posed. Wraith listened, his inhumanly still face revealing nothing. When I'd finished, the silence stretched, broken only by the low thrum of the Black Star's generators. "Intriguing," he finally remarked. "A new plague to sweep through the belt. Or perhaps a new weapon." The thought frightened me. Wraith, with access to whatever was brewing in that lab, he would be unstoppable. "You think I'd come to you unless this was about more than profits?" I retorted. His robotic arm tapped at his console, bringing up a map of the wasted belt, highlighting a region near Volkov's usual haunts. "Word reaches me that one of his outposts went dark a few days back. No distress calls, no scavengers picking up the scraps. Could be mere coincidence. could also be your lab. And if we hit it, what's in it for you? I asked. Knowledge. Wraith's smirk was cold and sharp. The kind a man with ambition can leverage. The deal was struck with a handshake that felt more like a threat. Gregor wouldn't be happy. An alliance with Wraith was like sleeping with a viper, but we didn't have any other options. The clock was ticking for the entire belt. The raid was swift. 3 of my battered ships, crewed by a mix of my crew and Wraith's mercs, descended on the asteroid base. I led the assault myself, old instincts kicking back in with satisfaction. The resistance was fierce. Those lab freaks fought like cornered beasts. But they were outnumbered and overpowered. Inside the facility, the carnage grew worse. More of the creatures, even more warped than the first. Spindly, many-legged horrors, hulking brutes patched with mismatched limbs, and things that, well, I tried to block the memory of those. The scientist was long gone. His research a scattered mess amidst the bloodstains and broken surgical equipment. What mattered, though, was the source. Vats bubbling with a viscous, glowing fluid. The heart of the infection. The poison that twisted men into monsters. It had to be destroyed. Rig it with charges, I ordered. The mercs didn't argue. Even these hardened killers had a limit, and whatever nightmares had been brewed in this place had crossed it. The detonation rocked the asteroid. As we limped away, a blinding flash lit up the void, followed by a debris field marking the grave of an unspeakable evil. It was done, but victory tasted bitter on my tongue. The belt felt darker now, the threat more insidious. The return to the scrap ring was a grim procession, tension taut and ready to ignite into full-blown panic at the slightest provocation. Word had spread. Whispers of twisted experiments and deadly contagions, enough to make even the most hardened scavenger reconsider their next run. Back at Gregor's, the stench of stale synth booze mingled with a fresh undercurrent of fear. I pushed through the crowd, eyes drawn immediately to Mauler's infirmary, where a hastily erected sheet barely concealed the hulking silhouette within. "Tark!" Gregor's voice was low, a rumble laced with resignation. He didn't offer his usual sneer, just a terse nod toward the curtained-off area. Steeling myself, I ducked inside. Mauler was hunched over a workbench, his cybernetic arm moving with lightning speed as he tinkered with surgical tools. The air buzzed with the whine of a microsaw and the acrid scent of disinfectant. And there, strapped to a gurney, was what remained of Jeb. My stomach lurched. He was different. Insectoid limbs sprouted from his ruined frame, chitinous and glinting darkly. One of his eyes had swollen, bulging outward with multiple lenses, and yet, beneath the transformation, recognition still shone in his remaining good eye. "Easy, big guy," Mauler muttered. "Lie still for scrap's sake." "Did it work?" I asked. Mauler grunted, not looking up from his work. "He's alive, ain't he? Whether it'll stick, that's another matter. This infection, it's in his brain, his bones, fighting his own body as much as the poison." Jeb, or what was left of him, attempted a speech, the words mangled by unfamiliar mouthparts. A pitiful whine escaped him, a weak, inhuman sound. "The neural link—" I swallowed, the words like sandpaper in my throat. "There's no saving it, is there?" Mauler finally met my gaze. "Kid was half machine already. Now he's something else. If he even keeps his mind, it won't be the Jeb we knew." And there it was. The brutal truth laid bare. We'd stopped the asteroid lab, but the damage was done. The belt wouldn't forget what we'd seen, the threat lurking just beneath the surface, and I had to face the reality I might have created a new monster. Gregor's voice broke into my bleak reverie. "Raid went well, I hear. Wraith happy." His tone was tight, accusatory. "Happy enough," I replied wearily. "Lab's gone. No chance of it spreading." A half-truth, leaving unsaid that the infection was already walking among us. "And your payment?" Gregor pressed. "What bit of knowledge was worth this?" He gestured with disgust toward the curtained infirmary, I hesitated, then spilled it. The outpost, Volkov's silent base, and Wraith's belief that whatever horrors were unleashed there had ties to our current plague. The name Volkov sent a ripple of unease through the room. If that butcher was behind this. "We're walking blind," Gregor muttered. "Might as well have lit a beacon calling every warlord and their twisted scientist crawling out of the shadows." He was right. The belt was a powder keg, and we'd just struck a match. We had changed the rules of the game, but whether we'd become the hunters or the hunted remained to be seen. A grim silence fell over Gregor's bar. The usual din of spacers and scavengers seemed muted, swallowed by the invisible weight of our revelation. Even Mauler had paused, his cyber arm frozen in place, a scalpel dangling from gleaming pincers. "Volkov!" Gregor finally hissed. His eyes were narrowed, calculating. He didn't fear the warlord, not truly, but recognized a new threat, a new level of brutality even for the wasted belt. It turned my stomach. In the grand scheme of things, I was no different from Gregor, from Wraith, just another scavenger clinging to survival by tooth and nail. But seeing your own crew warped into nightmares, it carved away at a piece of your soul you thought was long gone. A commotion at the bar's entrance snapped my attention. A lone figure staggered in, gaunt and wild-eyed, his ragged clothes scorched and speckled with rust-brown stains. A survivor, barely. "Volkov's outpost," he said, collapsing against the grimy bar. "It's gone. They came out of nowhere." The words lingered in the air like a death sentence. The other patrons muttered nervously, their eyes darting toward the door as if expecting a horde of abominations to descend. "Who?" Gregor demanded, his grip on the survivor's collar tightening. The man coughed, a wet, bubbling sound that made my skin crawl. Not the usual warlord thugs, scarecrows, wrapped in rags and chemsuits, gas, fire, then the creatures, like the ones on the asteroid, Mauler said, his voice low. The survivor's eyes widened in recognition. Yeah, like those, but worse. His breath hitched. They were organized, not like wild beasts, like they had a plan. Ice slithered down my spine, an army of monsters led by some twisted mastermind. That wasn't just Volkov, that wasn't just a threat, it was an extinction-level event for the belt. Gregor released the man, shoving him aside with disgust. "Get out of here! Spread your panic somewhere else!" But it was too late. The seed of terror had been planted. I could see it in the shifting expressions, the darting glances toward darkened corners. The belt was always a harsh mistress, but this was a fear that cut to the bone. "We need answers," I said. It might already be too late to save the belt, but we'd go down fighting, not whimpering. And Volkov might have them. Mauler snorted. "You think he'll just share the secrets of his new toys? That warlord will skin you alive for even asking." That's where Wraith comes in. The thought of returning to that snake pit made me want to spit. But we were out of options. He'll know where Volkov's hiding, and maybe he'll see how this new threat endangers even his ambitions. Gregor grunted. "Fine, you play diplomat, Tark. But if Wraith smells weakness, he'll pounce. And when he does, we'll be ready," I finished. There was no guarantee, not of anything out here in the void. The belt, as it turned out, was a breeding ground for monsters, in more ways than one. Returning to the Black Star was like walking willingly into a viper's den. The guards eyed me with contempt and amusement, likely recalling my previous visit. But this time, I came armed with more than just a shaky alliance. I came with knowledge that even Wraith, with all his influence, couldn't ignore. They led me through the same halls, the opulent decor a stark contrast to the brutal realities of the wasted belt. Every shadow seemed pregnant with lurking threats, every footstep an ominous countdown. And there, as before, Wraith waited in his command center, the glint of his cybernetic eye promising both danger and opportunity. "Back so soon, Tark." His voice was a silken purr. "Has Gregor's generosity already run dry?" "I bring news," I retorted, holding his gaze. "More of those creatures. This time an organized force, not just lab accidents." Wraith leaned forward, the tilt of his head the only sign of his surprise. "Go on." I recounted the survivor's story, describing the masked assailants and the disciplined savagery of their attack. Wraith listened intently, his augmented face unreadable. "Volkov is experimenting," I concluded. "Or someone's pulling his strings. If we don't stop it—" He cut me off with a raised hand. "Volkov's a madman, but no fool. This isn't his style. He craves power, not extinction." My gut twisted. He was right. This was something far more insidious than Volkov's usual brand of depravity. "Then who?" "That's what I intend to find out," Wraith said, his voice sharp as a razor. He rose, his cybernetic limbs moving in a bizarre manner. "Volkov will have a bolt hole. He always leaves himself an escape, the cunning rat." Wraith wasn't motivated by compassion, that much was clear, but the prospect of a force rivaling his own, an invisible enemy threatening even his iron grip on the Black Star, that would drive him more fiercely than any plea for humanity. "So we hit him," I said, determination replacing the knot of fear in my gut. "You'll need a strike force that knows their way around a fight, not just your hired thugs." He might be ruthless, but Wraith wasn't stupid. He knew my crew, despite their motley nature, were damn good at their job. Intrigue flashed in his artificial eye. "An unlikely alliance," he mused. "But desperation breeds strange bedfellows." Leaving the Black Star felt less like escape and more like a temporary reprieve. The terms of the alliance were loose at best. It relied on Wraith's insatiable ambition and our shared desire for survival. But those were brittle threads to hang hope on in the brutal landscape of the belt. Back at the scrap ring, Gregor and Mauler awaited my report, their skepticism imprinted on their faces. When I conveyed Wraith's terms, Gregor all but spat on the floor. "Working for that snake? You've gone crazy, Tark." "Crazy or dead," I countered. "You heard the survivor. It's happening right now. We can cower in this glorified junkyard, or we can strike back." Mauler grunted, his lone eye narrowed in contemplation. "The doc's right. Those critters will find their way here sooner or later. Might as well meet them at the source." My gaze settled on the infirmary, the sheet still obscuring Jeb's new form. Whatever humanity lingered behind those insectoid eyes, he deserved a fighting chance. The rest of the belt did too. We might be a collection of ruthless scavengers, but we were the only defense against the nightmare crawling across the stars. Preparation for war became a top priority in the scrap ring. Our usual bickering and backstabbing dissolved, replaced by the stark focus of a cornered animal. Each clan, each independent crew pitched in, pooling resources with a begrudging cooperation forged in the crucible of impending doom. Gregor's network became a lifeline. Whispers passed through shadowed channels, rumors of hidden bases and scavenged tech from long-dead skirmishes. Maps were consulted, clandestine supply routes established. The scrap ring hummed with the kind of activity usually fueled by greed, now driven by a far darker motivation. My own crew was a microcosm of the ring's transformation. Skitch, ever brash, embraced the chaos with relish. He tinkered with our turrets, his usual jokes replaced by a steady stream of muttered technical jargon. His hands, usually slick with grease, worked with a newfound finesse, upgrading and jury-rigging with a frantic creativity. Mauler, as always, was the voice of pragmatism. "They outnumber us, outgun us," he declared, tapping his cybernetic arm on a crude battlefield schematic. "We got to be smart, not just savage." The infirmary had become his domain. What remained of Jeb was more weapon than man now. Mauler had salvaged what he could of Jeb's cybernetic implants, reinforcing them and repurposing the neural link for combat directives. The results? Well, I tried not to dwell on the insectoid horror that now lurked beneath the bandages. But when Mauler met my gaze, there was something that might have been pity in his usually cold eye. Even Wraith's ilk contributed in their twisted way. My crew found themselves outfitted with rebreathers, hastily modified chem suits, protection against whatever gas or biological horrors Volkov's new masters might unleash. Each delivery from the Black Star came with a price tag, of course, debts to be settled in blood and salvage once the immediate threat was dealt with. The raid itself was executed with brutal precision. Wraith's intel led us to a barren moon, riddled with tunnels and scars of old mining operations. Our scavenged ships, usually a hodgepodge of mismatched tech, now moved with unity under my command. Wraith's mercs provided firepower, hardened and vicious, but I made sure my own crew spearheaded the assault. Inside the base, the stench of chemicals and something fouler, something that clung to the back of your throat, assaulted us. Volkov's guards fought with fanatical zeal, fueled by madness or drugs or both. And then, the creatures. Larger, more organized than anything we'd seen before. They surged through the tunnels like a plague unleashed, their patched skin, augmented limbs, and unsettling intelligence making them a horrifying force. The battle raged in a maelstrom of blaster fire and curses. Skitch, manning the turret, screamed a triumphant oath with each spray of plasma fire that incinerated a cluster of the Abominations. Beside me, one of Wraith's mercs fell, his scream cut short as a bladed limb skewered him. And then through the chaos, I glimpsed movement in the shadows, a hunched figure directing the onslaught. "There!" I yelled over the comms, shouldering my blaster. "Leader, maybe, or the puppet master!" I sprinted for the figure, weaving around the carnage, trusting my crew and Wraith's goons to cover my back. The figure, cloaked in tattered protective gear, turned, revealing not the warped features of a madman but a gas mask. Too ordinary, and that ordinariness sent a terror deeper than any monster could. I lunged, but the figure was swift. Dodging my grasp, they pulled a trigger, and a sweet scent filled my nostrils. My vision warped, the world spinning nauseatingly. A canister, gas. And then, Mauler's gruff voice cut through the roaring in my ears. "Hold your damn breath, boss!" The world snapped back into sharp focus, my lungs burning in protest. Mauler tackled me from behind, his cybernetic arm reinforced with scavenged armor, shielding us both. The gas hissed and dissipated, leaving a stinging chill in its wake. When I scrambled to my feet, the cloaked figure was gone, leaving nothing but the stench and the promise of future confrontation. My lungs burned, and the scent of the gas clung to my skin. Curses traveled through the tunnels, spat out by my crew and Wraith's surviving goons. The cost of victory was laid bare in the twisted bodies strewn across the floor, those of both Volkov's forces and our own. This wasn't a war we could win by attrition, just prolong the inevitable. "Find that slimy bastard!" Wraith's voice crackled over the comms, laced with a fury that mirrored my own. "I want that lab of horrors dismantled, every scrap of filth they've been cooking up destroyed." He was right, of course. It was ruthless pragmatism at its finest, the kind that had gotten us this far in the belt. Still, a bitter taste lingered. The enemy still had a face, a name, somewhere lurking, pulling the strings of this orchestrated plague. We found Volkov in his private quarters. His face was contorted in a silent scream, a single, jagged wound marring his chest. It wasn't a clean kill, more like an execution, a brutal message left behind. Our initial shock morphed into a realization. The masked figures who'd attacked the base weren't there to simply silence Volkov. They were cleaning house. Someone, perhaps even Volkov himself, had stumbled onto something bigger, something more horrifying than the experiments they were creating. Back in the infirmary, a heavy quiet filled the space. Jeb's form twitched restlessly against his restraints. Mauler, his lone eye bloodshot, muttered diagnostics as he fine-tuned the crude neural link. "He won't last long like this," Mauler finally declared, his usual gruffness laced with exhaustion. "His body, it's tearing itself apart trying to adapt." "Can't you fix him? Patch him up?" I asked. Jeb, the hulking, big-hearted mutant, had been the first to step up when we'd discovered those horrors in the asteroid lab. I owed him, and I was failing that debt with each passing hour. Mauler shook his head. "Whatever's in him, it's gone too far. Best I can do is make it fight for us, not against us. A weapon, that's all he is now." The brutality of it sickened me to my core. We were losing. Not just the battle, but whatever scrap of humanity we'd clung to out here. Gregor was waiting by my ship, his scowl even deeper than usual. "Wraith wants his cut," he announced bluntly. "Demands we hand over whatever intel we scooped from the lab." "Like hell we will," I snarled. It was more than just greed. Sharing Volkov's twisted research with a tyrant like Wraith was to ignite a powder keg under the already crumbling belt. Gregor grunted. "He won't take no for an answer. Got his own scavengers sniffing around already." Fury coiled tight in my chest. It was the damnable reality of the belt. There was always a bigger predator, always a more dangerous play to be made. Our fragile alliance felt as if it might shatter at the slightest provocation. The intercom sputtered to life, Skitch's voice crackling through, strained with alarm. "Boss, you gotta see this. Incoming transmission. It's from those masked freaks that took down Volkov." It had come to this then. The unseen puppet masters pulling the strings, finally stepping into the light. Whatever face lay beneath those masks, they held the fate of the entire belt in their hands. This wasn't about intel or ambition anymore. This was about survival or annihilation. A grainy image materialized on the ship's monitor, distorted by static and deliberate obscuring. A figure, cloaked in those same chemical suits, faced us, their voice masked by a modulator that made it mechanical and inhuman. "Tark," the voice said, devoid of any warmth or inflection, "you have proven resourceful. You're the ones turning the belt inside out." I spat back, forcing my voice to stay steady. "What the hell do you want?" "Correction," the speaker replied. "The belt was already rotten. We simply provide opportunity." The masked figure paused, seeming to consider their next words. When they continued, it was with an insidious softness that was more menacing than any outward threat could be. "We offer a future beyond the slow death of scavenging, order, purpose, a chance to rise above the endless cycle of decay you call existence." Skitch snorted with disgust. "Yeah? And what's the catch? Indentured servitude? Body modification?" The figure gave an approximation of a chuckle. "Astute. All transformations require sacrifice, a willingness to embrace progress. Your belt is riddled with those who possess the potential. They simply lack the vision." My stomach churned. They were painting a twisted picture of salvation, one built on the mutations they unleashed. This wasn't just war, it was an insidious indoctrination. "You think we're gonna buy your lies?" Gregor barked, disgust lacing his voice. "We'll bleed you dry before we let you take over." "Resistance is anticipated," the figure replied calmly. "It is the way of the unenlightened. You will come to us in time, or you will fall, fertilizing the future with your corpses. The choice, insignificant as it may be, rests with you." The transmission winked out, leaving behind a stunned silence. It was a declaration of war, but a war fought in whispers as much as warships, a creeping sickness that threatened to infect the belt from within. "Well, scrap and spit, this just got a hell of a lot worse," Skitch muttered, breaking the tension. His typical bluster was forced, the fear mirrored in all of our eyes. Mauler was already barking orders, practicality cutting through the despair. "Analyze that transmission, every damn glitch. They'll have left traces, and get Jeb prepped." We'd stumbled onto something far more dangerous than mere territory wars and scavenging rights. This veiled enemy, with their masked hordes and talk of poisoned salvation, was a threat to the life in the wasted belt. Gregor clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Wraith's gonna flip when he finds out we got nothing to give him but bad news." "Wraith's the least of our problems," I muttered, staring out at the vast expanse of stars. The belt had become a petri dish, and we were nothing more than lab rats at the mercy of some unseen, uncaring scientist. We had a choice ahead of us: to adapt, to fight with tooth and nail, or to succumb to a horrifying new order. And survival, well, that was going to come with a heavy cost. Dealing with Wraith was like wrestling a greased-up viper. His fury was a tangible thing, a storm confined within the opulent walls of his command center. I bore the brunt of it, backed by an uneasy knot of my crew and a few of his goons. He'd insisted on tagging along as collateral. No intel? No tech? His robotic eye whirred ominously. Then pay the debt with blood, Tark. Yours will do nicely. A tense standoff ensued. My crew bristled, fingers twitching closer to holstered blasters. Skitch broke the silence first. We gave you what we promised, knocked out that lab, thinned Volkov's herd, and brought a bigger, uglier threat right to our door, Wraith spat back. Your little raid has set the whole belt on edge. Every scavenger, every warlord worth their salt will be scrounging for a piece of this pie. His words hit home harder than blaster fire. Damn it, he was right. The belt was never a sanctuary. But this felt like knocking over the first domino, the start of an inevitable, catastrophic chain reaction. It was Mauler, of all people, who cut through the tension. We ain't in this alone, Wraith, he said, his gruff voice surprisingly calm. Your ambitions, your territory. Those masked bastards don't give a damn. They're playing a bigger game. I watched as the gears in Wraith's warped mind began to turn. It pained me, but Mauler was right. In the face of annihilation, pragmatism was our only true weapon. You have a plan then, old man, Wraith drawled, his tone laced with begrudging respect, acknowledging that we held a card he desperately needed. I laid it on the table. The transmission, the offer of dark salvation, the threat as tangible as any fleet of warships. Wraith listened, his artificial eye narrowing in calculation. They want unity, I said, choosing my words carefully, but on their terms, not the kind that comes at the point of a blaster. Indoctrination, Wraith hissed. A damn Trojan horse full of those twisted freaks. The image of Jeb rose unbidden in my mind, a reminder of the cost of even a single warped heart and mind. Wraith was no fool. He knew an existential threat when he saw one. So we fight, Gregor declared, smashing his fist on the armrest. Forget alliances, forget debts. We hit 'em hard, hit 'em fast, and make the price of setting foot in the belt too damn high to pay. Wraith's robotic lips twisted into something approximating a smirk. A suicide charge? Now that sounds more like the Tark I know. Better to go down in a blaze of glory than live on our knees, I retorted, the words bitter on my tongue. The deal was struck, not with handshakes, but with the understanding of men who knew they were damned either way. Wraith's information network would pinpoint any whispers of the masked ones. My crew would lead the charge, fueled by the same bravado that had kept them alive this long. This wasn't about winning. The scales were tipped, the game rigged from the start. This was about the belt, always about the belt, a dying beast lashing back at the encroaching darkness, and maybe, amidst the carnage and the sacrifice, we might find hope, or go down in a blaze bright enough to be seen across the endless stars. Reports trickled in, raids on outlying outposts, sightings of the masked zealots, whispers of belt clans uniting under the banner of pure, terrified self-interest. It was, as Gregor bluntly put it, the best damn shot we had. Down in the bowels of my ship, Mauler unveiled his final abomination. Jeb, or what remained of him, was barely recognizable. His once humanoid form was swollen, patched with scavenged armor plating, insectoid legs sprouting in a chaotic tangle. "He'll hold 'em off," Mauler grunted, his voice hoarse. "A walking nightmare. Buys us time, maybe." And what then? The question lingered between us. We both knew after might not even exist. Mauler looked away, something like regret twisting his scarred features. Don't matter, he was already gone. Best we can do is make his death count for something. The raid came at twilight, bathed in the rusty glow of a dying star. Wraith's intel led us to a cluster of barren asteroids, a hidden nest for the masked fanatics. Our approach was bold and unyielding. Battered ships blasted their thrusters, weapons discharging a constant barrage into the void. The enemy responded, launching from concealed hangars within the asteroids. Their ships swarmed, their numbers far greater than we'd anticipated. Disciplined volleys of blaster fire rained down, followed by the horrific onslaught of their mutated boarding crews descending upon us. Skitch swore as our turret struggled to match the onslaught. "There's too damn many!" I rammed our ship into the fray, targeting their largest cruiser. Wraith's goons, hardened bastards even by belt standards, fought alongside us. It was a dogfight amidst the asteroid field, thrusters blazing, hulls cracking under the strain. "Mauler!" I barked into our comms. "Unleash the beast!" Silence crackled over the comms. Then Mauler's gruff voice cut in. "Hold your horses, Tark. Wait for the signal." And then, like a harbinger of annihilation, he emerged from the shadows of the largest asteroid. Jeb surged forward. Blaster fire bounced off his armor, and those who dared close combat found themselves skewered by blade-tipped limbs. His scream was a harsh distortion of the friend we'd once known. "Now!" I shouted, weaving my battered ship through the chaos. We broke formation, plunging deeper into the heart of their base. Then, from within the depths of the asteroid, a blinding light erupted. The masked figures shrieked in agony, their protective suits disintegrating as the light seared flesh and twisted metal. We scrambled for cover, the brilliance searing our retinas even as we watched in awe. The core of the asteroid base glowed, then erupted in a blinding flash. The shockwave ripped through the asteroid cluster, the detonation shattering ships and sending debris hurtling through the void. Silence descended, a ringing silence punctuated by the distant rumble of collapsing asteroids and the whine of damaged systems. The masked zealots were gone, their base reduced to a ruin. The victory was as absolute as it was horrifying. "What in the blazes was that?" Skitch muttered, awe mixing with horror in his voice. The comms crackled, and Wraith's taut voice cut through the stunned silence. "A parting gift. One of their own twisted experiments, I wager." The true cost of our victory settled like a lead weight upon my chest. We knew too well the corrupting power of unchecked experimentation, the price of pushing boundaries beyond what was humane. They'd unleashed a weapon upon themselves, a final act against the forces they sought to control. No cheers rose from my crew, only stunned silence. We had survived, but the belt had been irrevocably scarred. Out here in the darkness, amidst the wreckage of lost lives and forgotten morals, it was getting harder to tell where the evil ended and where we began. The belt would never be the same, and neither would we. Years turned like the rings of a dying planet in the wasted belt. The grand victory over the masked fanatics was relegated to whispers in dingy bars, the names of the lost inscribed on memorials alongside countless others. The scrap ring was a shadow of its former self. Sure, the scavengers still squabbled, but unity bound them, forged in the crucible of that final battle. Wraith still ruled over the Black Star, his ambitions burning as bright as ever, but there was a wary glint in his artificial eye, a respect, however grudging, for the scarred veterans who had bled alongside his mercs. My crew drifted apart, their paths diverging in the aftermath. Skitch, still brash but with his features revealing a newfound wariness, took on independent salvage contracts, his sharp eyes always scanning the darkness for a threat that might never resurface. Gregor remained the beating heart of the scrap ring, his gruff exterior concealing a deep-rooted fear that the worst was yet to come. He channeled that fear into vigilance, into forging alliances and stockpiling scavenged tech against a future none dared speak of aloud. Mauler vanished into the shadowy corners of the belt. Some say he wanders the dead ruins, seeking redemption for his creations. Others claim he built a hidden sanctuary for those warped by the belt's dangers, a haven for those too changed for even our brutal society. As for me, I kept the ship flying, taking on jobs that led me to the far corners of the dead star systems. Jeb's hulking form was never far, a towering shadow on the bridge. I fed him, tuned his rudimentary neural link, and watched his multiple eyes search the endless expanse for an enemy that might reside within us all. One night, on a barren moon pockmarked with ancient craters, I settled by a sputtering campfire, Above, the stars burned cold and distant. Jeb lumbered over, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "What are we now?" I asked, staring at my friend's horrifying transformation. "Still men, or something else entirely?" No answer. Only the crackling of the fire and the mournful howl of a solar wind. Yet, as the embers died and the vast, cold universe pressed down, I found a sort of twisted peace. We'd paid the price for survival in blood and warped flesh. In the belt, there was no redemption, no grand purpose. Just the hard truth that tomorrow, we might have to pay that terrible price all over again.